Still working on my
Good
project.
evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us at the special meeting of the Madera City Council. If we can have roll call, please.
Mayor Andrew Medellin,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Steve Montes,
Here.
Councilmember Cece Gallegos. She's in, but she hasn't made it in yet. So
Yeah, she should
but
be in
she is-
shortly.
She is absent for now. Councilmember Jose Rodriguez, absent. Councilmember Derek Robinson Sr.,
Present.
Councilmember Santos Garcia,
Here.
Councilmember Donald Hawley.
Present.
Thank you, Claudia. If you'll stand with me for the pledge, please. Ready, salute. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will let the record reflect that Councilwoman Gallegos has joined us. Moving into public comment, the first 15 minutes of the meeting are reserved for members of the public to address the council on items which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes, and speakers will be asked to identify themselves to state the subject of their comment. I'll ask at this time, is there anybody in the audience wishing to speak under public comment? Seeing none, close public comment. We'll move into the sole reason why we are here this evening. This is our workshop, a workshop on the city's proposed fiscal year 2019-2020 budget pertaining to the general and enterprise funds. Mr. Rodriguez.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Arnoldo Rodriguez, the city manager. The item before you this evening is truly a workshop so we can begin the discussions for next year's fiscal budget. The council may recall on April the 4th, we discussed the capital improvement plan or program from 2019-2020, where the council during that meeting had also identified some potential projects for next year. During that meeting, we didn't identify the funding for all of those. However, we do have a couple of options that we would like to discuss with council this evening. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right into it. So a couple of the big picture key changes for next year's fiscal budget. One of the items that we are recommending is proposing to separate the general fund from Measure K. Measure K, as the council is aware, was a voter passed initiative. It was passed in 2016. During that time, the then council had recommended that Measure K only be spent, or probably spent's not the appropriate term, allocated for police and fire. So one of the challenges that we've had here at the city is those funds were placed in the same bucket with the general fund. The principal reason for that, because Measure K was passed as a general tax, not a specific tax. With that being said, though, I think it has caused a little bit of confusion for both the community, the council, and city staff. So moving forward, what we would like to do beginning July 1st of this year is our recommendation is to separate the three into three different fund accounts: the general fund, fire department Measure K, and police department Measure K. And there are a handful of benefits that for that. One of the biggest is that moving forward at any given moment, we know exactly the amount of money that's in either account. On top of Measure K, moving forward, one of the things that we would like to do is to set aside funds for fire engine / ladder truck replacement in next year's fiscal budget. One of the items that we're going to be recommending is a $200,000 pot or fund allocation that would be placed in a pot to replace future fire engines and fire trucks. One of the challenges is that these vehicles are extremely expensive. The one that the city most recently purchased was over $1.4 million without all of the equipment. And so the most recent truck that was purchased with DIF funds, those development impact fee funds, and that's an appropriate use for them. However, moving forward, as those funds are used for other items, we simply want to make sure that the city is being fiscally prudent and that we're setting those funds apart. The other item that we're going to be recommending is to begin to establish a 30% reserve fund for Measure K. A 30% fund reserve would allow us, in case there's an emergency or in case of a downturn, we have some funds available to continue our operations via Measure K. Currently, we have not been doing that. And one of the things that we're going to be recommending is that the fire department, out of their Measure K account, place in a reserve account specifically for the fire department, specifically as part of Measure K, $130,000, and the same thing for the police department. We are not using a very specific number in terms of 130,000 this year. As we were doing our budget, we thought that 130,000 would be appropriate. Our general fund policy is 30% of the general fund. So, for example, next year, Measure K is projected to generate $4.9 million. So at some point, using next year's anticipated revenues, it would be 30% of the $4.9 million. $260,000 does not get us there. However, again, this is simply seed money to start the process and to begin the dialogue. Next year, we may come before the council. If Measure K is doing better than what we anticipate, at that point, we would want to talk to the council and say, hey, council, maybe this year we can put 150,000 or 200,000, or maybe if the city does experience a downturn, maybe 130,000 is too much. Maybe we go down to 100,000 or something along those lines. However, I do want to identify that as one of the key changes in terms of what we're proposing for next year that the city has historically not done. A couple of other key changes. We are proposing to separate our capital projects apart from our general fund. The council historically, and quite frankly, I think the community and staff has struggled with relatively large swings in the city's budget process because we've combined capital projects and general fund projects. One of the items that we would like to do is to separate them. On top of that, capital projects, as the council is aware, can sometimes take 2 to 3 years to complete. And I think the Olive Avenue widening is a good example of that. I think that project's been going on for a number of years. And then we have these enormous swings in funding. And it's not that it's incorrect. I think, quite frankly, it could potentially be confusing for, again, the council, the community, and staff to say, why is there such an enormous swing of $2 or $3 or up to $5 million on any one account? So to try to minimize that, one of the things that we'd like to do is to separate the funds. So we have a pocket of money for capital projects. We have a completely separate fund account for the general fund. And that, I think, would help minimize that. Then the other item is the unassigned fund balance account, which I'm going to get into shortly here. And that account currently has $4.67 million as of April 4th. Actually, as of the most recent audited financials, which were presented to council on April the 3rd. However, the $4.6 million was from June 30th of 2018. A couple of key assumptions in terms of how we're proposing this year's budget. Our financial consultant, who's Mini Services, is projecting a 2% decrease in sales tax revenue. They very specifically called out Measure K versus sales tax, which they've separated. Measure K, they've identified a decrease of 2.1%, and then for sales tax, they've projected a 2% decrease. With that being said, a 2% decrease, it's based on the current fiscal year end, not what was initially projected going back about a year. So we're still projected to make more than what we projected last year, but it is a decrease in terms of where we're projected to end June of this year, so next month in about 30 days. And it is a 2% decrease. And one of the reasons is that they are projecting a slight decrease in the economy. And so therefore they're projecting a decrease in the city. With that being said, we're projecting to receive about $8.44 million in sales tax revenue. That does not include Measure K, so Measure K is separate from the 8.44. The city collects about 1% of all retail taxes, and the rest of it go to the state and the county and special districts and everyone else. So it's basically the 1 penny of the 7.75 of sales tax that we pay, and then we also collect the half-cent sales tax from Measure K. So about 1.5 cents per the 7.75% of what our, in terms of what the city or what customers are paying when you purchase something. With that being said, we do share our sales tax with the county. We share 3.75% of our sales tax goes to the county, and so that agreement was outlined as part of the tax sharing agreement that was approved between the city and the county June 6th of 2017. That's a 3-year agreement, so June 6th of 2020, which is about a little bit more than a year from now, about 13 months, a little bit less, we will have to, at some point, we'll have to start those negotiations with the county all over again. Transit occupancy tax, we're projecting a revenue of about $800,000, which is what we projected this year. The one nuance there is that La Quinta, which is directly across the street, at the time was not online. It's online now. And we are relatively conservative with that figure. We hope that with having La Quinta online now, hopefully that number goes up. However, I think it'd be premature to try to speculate if there's additional visitors or if the same amount of visitors are coming and they're simply changing their night. So if they were staying at Spring Hill, are they now simply coming over here? However, in the next couple of months, we'll get a much better idea on that. But the $800,000 is what we're projected to receive this year. That's what we projected in the current fiscal year, and that's what we're projecting next year. Property tax in lieu for VLF, and this was for vehicle licensing fees. Under then Governor Schwarzenegger, he had reduced the amount of funds that local agencies were receiving on vehicle licensing fees. In order to balance it, he told the cities that they were going to receive their greater share of property taxes, and we're projecting to receive about $6 million in next fiscal year. The current fiscal year that we're in was slightly less than that. It was pretty close to 6, but it was a little bit less. But in terms of key assumptions for how we prepared this budget, we're projecting $6 million. Property taxes, we're anticipating an increase versus the current fiscal year of about $260,000. We're anticipating, or we're projecting that we would receive about $3.7 million. The property taxes are collected by the county, and then they're returned to the local cities. And those funds are split between the county, the school districts. So in this case, it would be specifically Madera Unified because we only have one school district that serves our community, any special districts, and the city. This is negotiated during the tax sharing agreement. We receive 3% of property tax. So out of the property tax that property owners in the city of Madera, you're paying the property taxes to the county. We in turn get 3% of that. And those funds go into the general fund? Some other assumptions. The golf course revenue was projected based on current trends. That trend has seen a slight decrease in the past year, or I want to say the past 18 months. So we simply said, well, we're anticipating on continuing that trend, knowing that we'll be entering the negotiations with the operator. And if the number goes up in terms of revenue for the city, then that's awesome. And that's positive. But in the meantime, again, we did take a relatively conservative approach when it came to that specifically. Business license revenue, we're projecting about $450,000. Cable franchise tax fee, about $325,000. Electric franchise tax, about $360,000. The other item that we attempted to do this year is we currently have 28 vacant full-time positions in the city. We budgeted 17 of those positions at 100%. The principal reason for that is there's a handful of people that have been identified. Some people are beginning work in the next couple of weeks. If not, we anticipate that those 17 positions will be on board before July 1st. If it's not right on July 1st, it's going to be pretty close to it, and we just thought that it would be appropriate to budget those at 100%. A good number of the remaining positions, there are a couple that we're projecting to budget at 0%, which means that we're not projecting to fill those positions. So we're projecting to not fill them in the next fiscal year. And then the rest of the positions, and the several that are budgeted at 0, and when I mean several, we can probably count them on 3 fingers if I recall. And then the rest of them are anticipated or they're budgeted between 25 and 90% of the time. The 90% of the time, those are probably positions that we're anticipating where people will probably begin towards the end of August. And then some of them were 75%. We said, well, if we start the recruitment in July, they'll probably be on board around September. So one of the things that we tried doing is we tried capturing the salary savings instead of budgeting everyone at 100%, which quite frankly isn't the case. The one thing that we did not include in this budget, we did not include any salary savings for position turnover. That's one of the things that as we're moving forward that we're going to be taking a hard look at. We don't have a magic formula to say, is salary savings 5% within the police department versus engineering? Those are things moving forward that we'd like to see. However, in during our preparation for this specific budget, quite frankly, we simply didn't have the time to do it. And something for that exercise, one of the things you do want to take a look at, it's the age of your workforce, because there are probably some departments that have an aging workforce or are probably close to retirement, and it's somewhat of a fluid number. But with that being said, I'm pretty confident that we can identify a formula that we can collectively agree on to say, you know what, maybe the magic number is 6%, or maybe it's 6% during even years versus 5% in odd years, something along those lines. So we're going to try to come up with the formula. So then what we can do when we're budgeting in future years, we can craft policies, or our budgets can be on the most realistic expectations for all of us to agree on. And so that's something kind of that we're going to be doing. So a couple of enormous positives here. We are going to be proposing a balanced budget for the general fund. So as outlined in your staff report, we're projecting a roughly $32.4 million in revenues next year. That does not include Measure K. So Measure K specifically excluded out of this, and we're projecting expenses of $32.4 million. But again, based on the assumptions that I outlined before and based on the position control that we were discussing a short time ago. In terms of the city's fiscal policy, we're projecting that we're going to continue to maintain the minimum 30% as called for in the city's fiscal policy. So again, it's a balanced budget, and we're projecting the 30% reserve. A couple of items of Measure K, which I alluded to a short time ago, it is a half-cent sales tax. Next year, we're projected to generate roughly $4.9 million in Measure K funding. That is split 50-50, police and fire, two brand new accounts. If the funds are not used, those funds would remain in that bucket of dollars. And then during next year's budget discussions, we'll come back before the city council and we'll talk about it. If Measure K does better than the projected $4.9 million, and the $4.9 million projection does come from our financial consultant, that number comes, thank you, Tim, from Uni Services. If there's anything that's in excess of that, we would come back before the city council and we would ask city council to appropriate it, or we would simply leave it there. So if it does better, we simply don't have the luxury to go spend it, in other words. So in terms of looking forward for next year, a couple of key things. We are looking at bringing on 7 new firefighters once Fire Station 58 is complete. The fire station's anticipated to be completed in December of this year. We're anticipating that should be operational towards the latter part of January of 2020. And so with that does come cost. There's maintenance cost of about $102,000 to maintain the fire station for the different things they need. The other thing too, their new gear, I'm going to call it, because the name escapes me. I'm sure the firefighters can tell me. Their turnouts. Thank you. We have about $70,000 for new turnouts. It's about $10,000 per firefighter, and we would have to purchase that as well. So those are really one-time expenses. Well, they're one-time until we have to replace them. And then one item that's not captured in tonight's presentation is at some point, staff will probably be returning to the city council to talk about potentially identifying a new battalion chief position. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. But again, any unused funds would be carried over to next year within the separate account. In terms of the city's fund reserve policy, again, our city fund reserve policy states that we have to maintain 30% of our general fund. So today, we have about $11.6 million in that policy, and we have a 15, 5, and a 10% split. Let me identify one item on here. So one of the things too, historically, the city's kept capital projects within the general fund. So that increased the amount that was required to be kept in the policy. Now that we're separating the two, that's going to change that dynamic. I'm not here this evening, quite frankly, to be prepared to really dive into the details on that, but we will hear very shortly. Because again, I simply want to make sure that with us moving it over, we're only doing it one time. And so when we are having the discussion with council, that we're absolutely confident that we know the exact dollar amount and that we're not speculating in terms of what that could be. So that is going to be a discussion that we'll be bringing before the city council. This is the unassigned fund balance that we had discussed earlier. So the city currently has about $4.67 million in that account. during the April 3rd City Council meeting, during our annual audit discussion, it was discussed that we had this much money in that account. There's roughly $2.3 million in that account for the new Fire Station 58. So if one were to take that $2.3 million out of the account, that lowers it to about 2.4 roughly. Well, going through this process, a couple of things that we've all collectively learned is that there are some funds in that account that are Measure K funds that should be part of either police or fire. And there's also some additional funds in that account that are for insurance liability. As we're moving forward here in the next couple of weeks, one of the things that we're going to really be sharpening our pencils on is to reallocate those funds into the proper accounts. They're what I would say they should probably be in assigned accounts, not unassigned accounts. And I think that that's going to give the council, staff, and the community a much better idea of exactly how much money we truly have in unassigned funds. How this was built up over time, it's that as the funds were coming in, staff was allocating them to certain things, for example, the fire station, but it was put in this pot of funds rather than in Measure K because the Measure K pot didn't exist. It was simply a general fund account. There's really all good news tonight in terms of the general fund, really Measure K in terms of how we kind of came to the conclusions for the $32.4 million general fund balance, the $4.9 million in Measure K. However, this is something that we have to flesh out a little bit, and we'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks because, again, when I come before the City Council, we want to be sure that we're 100% accurate, and I think that I'd be doing the council, our labor groups, our coworkers at the city, and the community a disservice by trying to speculate exactly how much should be in there.
I think that's a very good point, Mr. Rodriguez, because in the previous slides, on almost every slide, I saw the word assumptions or projections. And it really is hard to nail down exactly what those numbers are going to be until it actually happens. We really have no idea what sales tax is going to be until after it happens. And same thing with property tax. We kind of have an idea, we can set a projection, but everything is really based on exactly that, right, Tim? They're just assumptions and projections until we can actually get to that point. So I can appreciate where it's exactly that, but at the same time, it really is hard to make decisions on council without firm numbers.
Correct. Right. And in terms of the current fiscal year, so I'm sorry, Councilmember Garcia.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez. Councilman Garcia has a question.
Could
to
you
that.
back to the other
Yes,
previous slide? I don't want to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure I got this correct. So previously, we said that this was an unassigned fund balance, and it was 4.67.
Correct.
And then we're making an adjustment of 2.3 million for the new fire station.
Correct. And then there's two other accounts.
So what are we left with at the end of the day?
So it would roughly be 2.4. However, there's two other accounts in there as well. When the city purchased the police department annex building, I believe in July of 2018, that was roughly $1.2 million. And those funds are in that account. The second thing that's in that account is our insurance liability, which is roughly $1.2 million. In looking at the policy in the past, what Tim was looking at it literally in the past 48 hours, one of the things that we have to take a really hard look at is our general fund reserve policy. There's language in there that, quite frankly, I haven't had the opportunity to really dive into to see what that policy stipulates. There is discussion in the policy that articulates if the city has money in here, then that money can count towards meeting the 30% general fund reserve policy. However, again, I think that it would be remiss of me to attempt to articulate it without really diving into it a little bit more. With that being said, quite frankly, I think the $4.67 million is probably not an unassigned balance. I think if we were to take it all out and start allocating it in the accounts where I think it should be, that number gets dramatically reduced pretty quickly. And when I mean dramatically, there's probably not going to be a whole lot in there to the tune of a couple $100,000.
So if I understand you correctly, this unassigned fund balance really a misnomer because there is no $4.67 million in there. they're allocated to something
They're allocated,
other.
correct. Yes, correct.
This is good to know.
Yes, it is.
I want more sidewalks, and I can't use this money for more sidewalks.
I completely agree.
Councilman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Member Dillon. Arnoldo, you know, the insurance liability, how is that not accounted for in a different account? I mean, just to wrap this, try to get this correct here, you have an unassigned fund balance that has monies for insurance liability. Is that not accounted for?
There's a separate account, and I'm gonna look over to Wendy. There was the account, which is the $1 million account.
Always takes
So-
a second or two.
Fund 109 is your insurance reserve fund. It has an operating budget, but it also has a fund balance. It's my understanding that in the fund balance, there is an amount designated for claims payment, but there's additional funds that are not designated. So there's, one of the numbers was 1 million and one was 1.1. I just don't remember which was designated and which was undesignated. So the money's in the fund, it's just not designated, so when you get your financial statements, it's in that category at the bottom, right, that says, is it undesignated?
Yeah.
Unassigned.
Yes.
Okay, so shouldn't we have a fund for that, specifically for the insurance liability? Or, I mean, because I understand, I'm trying
I
to.
agree. I agree that we should have a separate account for that fund.
Only because if
Yeah.
you're pointing in this pool of monies and you're calling it unassigned, it's not really unassigned. And specifically for insurance liability, I know that we don't have the claims back, but I mean, we should at least anticipate that there is gonna be claims and this is the amount that we allocate for that.
Correct. I completely agree with you.
Aside from the sidewalks, you know, there was other capital improvements that the city might need, and I was looking forward to that on the staff report. I had it on my list, like all other council members did, I'm sure.
Correct.
Thank you.
So in terms of the current fiscal year, one of the items that you'll notice is on your staff report, we did not attempt to project salary savings in the current fiscal year. There's a couple of reasons for that. Quite frankly, I think it'd be premature. One of the things that I think that it would be irresponsible of me to start putting numbers out without, again, having those numbers completely fleshed out, making sure that we can collectively agree on exactly what should be included in that. One of the challenges with throwing some of the numbers out, then people hold you to those numbers and say, hey, well, you told me it was X or Z. And we're not quite there yet. So with that being said, once we do have a concrete number, one of the first things we're going to do is come back to the city council. Once we have the numbers, as soon as we can come back before the city council to discuss those numbers in concrete, we're going to come back to the city council and say, this is how much money we're going to have as a surplus for the current fiscal year. Most of those funds are going to come from a savings in terms of salaries and benefits from vacant positions. Whatever that dollar amount is, we'll come before the city council, say, here's the funds, and that's when we can really start talking about the different things we can do with that for any one-time expenses, or at that point, whatever the council really informs staff to do. And again, it's going to be the council's prerogative to say, this is what I want. There's a couple of things that you're absolutely correct, Councilmember Rodriguez, that we talked about. One were the sidewalks, the sidewalk repairs during the CIP program. Discussion back on April the 4th. The second item was the repair of the curb over at Rotary Park. And we talked about, on a positive note, our city engineer has identified some potential funds to fix the west side of the curb along Gateway. However, that doesn't get us the funds to fix the west side in terms of the parking lot. However, once we identify a concrete number, we'll come back before the city council. We'll inform the city council, here's the number. It's no longer a moving number. We know this is it, set in stone. Let's decide what the council would like to do, if anything at all. It's completely up to the council. It's the council's prerogative. But again, one of the challenges is at this point, I didn't have a comfort level attempting to speculate what that number could be, because right now it's a very fluid number. I think in the upcoming years, this discussion may be taking a slightly different format. but I think this year, that's probably the appropriate route to take.
I agree. Mayor Pro Tem,
Thank you.
Montes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Arnoldo, so kind of following up on that, what is the usual variance on those estimates? Are we way off sometimes? Is it, I mean, obviously we don't have a crystal ball, and if there's an emergency situation, we can't really anticipate that, but historically, have we been pretty close, been way off?
You know, I
If
think
you can speak to that or anybody else.
Yeah, I'm going to look over to staff. I'm not too sure if I'm probably the best person to answer that, just because I really haven't sat through past discussions. One of the challenges is, well, I want to say challenge. It's a good challenge that for the past couple of years we've done better than our projected revenues, and so that's really helped out. Whereas this year we're projecting a decrease of 2%, so I'm not too sure how that plays into it. But one of the things, those are the things that I think moving forward, that gap is going to start to close. And the reason I believe that gap is going to close is because we're starting to hold some positions where we're taking into account the vacant positions. And so instead of budgeting those at 100%, we're going to budget, again, some of them, a couple of them at 0. We're not going to even fill them. And then there's some other positions that range between 25% and 90%. So looking forward, whatever gap we're going to have this year, if the economy stays status quo, then in theory, that's going to close. The other thing that's not really included on here is potential new development. And that's always positive, but we have Loves. Once they open up, we do have a tax sharing agreement with Loves where they're going to be receiving some of the sales tax that they generate back to Loves. The city will keep a portion of it for a number of years. So that's positive. And then there's a new hotel that recently submitted at Loves that they submitted some conceptual plans for discussion. So again, that would be our 6th hotel here in the city. But again, I'm not too sure exactly where the city's landed at in the past couple of years.
Thank you.
And so with that, I'm going to be turning it all over to Tim in a few minutes to start walking the council down department by department. But a couple of things, this overview simply shows the different general fund allocations. It does not include Measure K. So again, the 4.9 million for police and fire, which are split 50-50, are not included on this. However, if you simply take a look at it, this provides a broad overview of where general fund funding goes. The enterprise funds are not shown on here. So you have enterprise funds are your golf course, your sewer, your water, your solid waste. But again, this is simply the general fund, and that's one of the things that we wanted to highlight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and Tim will start walking you through some of the departments. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. So this budget presentation is at a pretty high level compared to what we've done in the past, and you can see that generally the budgets are staying fairly consistent. This is the Measure K and general fund combined. So you'll see there's a slight increase in total for the Measure K and the general fund, but we'll break that out separately between the regular general fund and the Measure K fund. So you can see that the general fund actually is coming down a little bit from last year's revised budget, or I should say current year's revised budget to next year's proposed budget. And up slightly from our projected current year budget. As the city manager mentioned, we have quite a bit of salary savings in the current year general fund budget. And that's reflected in here, as well as some slight savings in the M&O expenditures based on department's projections for the current fiscal year. Any questions on these slides? You'll note that the blue portion is salaries and benefits, and the golden portion is maintenance and operations, and then if there's any gray in there, it's the operating transfers out. So you can see that there's very little operating transfers out in the regular general fund here. Then we have the Measure K. You'll see that there's a pretty big increase in 1920 in the M&O costs. That's because all of the costs related to the fire station or fire department are contracted out. They're not included in salaries and benefits. So we're budgeting to include a half year for the new fire stations to be staffed. So that's the main reason for the large increase there in the M&O cost. And there's also some transfers out.
Tim, can I ask you a
Measure K
question
budget.
there?
Sure.
Yeah. So when you have a fully staffed fire department, are we also accounting for those positions as we go on for projected budget expenses? Meaning
We're taking that into concern for our future operational costs, yes.
So, I mean, because they've always had, there's been a lack of positions at the fire department. So have we considered that year after year, that we are allocating monies for these vacant positions? Meaning,
So, again, the fire station is contracted out. It's not a salaries and benefit thing. And if there's any savings there, it's because they perform better than anticipated for the contracted expenses related to CAL FIRE.
well, you mentioned 7 new hires.
Okay, so CAL FIRE will be hiring new staff to fill in for the new fire station, but that will be contracted services. So it's not salaries and benefits, but it's a contract with CAL FIRE that
But that's an ongoing expense. I'm just,
that is an ongoing expense. And this year we're only showing a half year, but when we're projecting out into our future, we are anticipating that we have enough to cover the fire station plus the debt service. So the debt service on the fire station plus the staff to operate it, which is included in their contracted services cost.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
yes, thank you.
Any further questions on that? Matt, did you have any other comments related to that? That sound correct to you? Okay, good. So yes, you will see that that'll increase considerably more in the future years because the contract for that. And then, again, this is only the Measure K, and it's only going to the new fire station, separate from the non-Measure K fire budget. So here's the budget for city clerk and city council. You'll see that that's gone down quite a bit. I imagine there's some anticipated savings related to the turnover in staff in there, and the maintenance and operation costs are staying relatively the same. The gold bar, or the orange portion. And so the key bullet points for the city clerk and city council are the hiring of a new city clerk, municipal implementation of the scanning system for scanning documents. There's the $850 per council member for travel, and $17,000 for League of California Cities Conference. If that's not used, it'll be returned to the general fund.
That's 17,000?
Yes, correct, Mayor. And that's 17,000. And one of the things that we attempted to project was what's the likelihood of the council members attending the conference, either League of California Cities Conference in Sacramento or in Long Beach, I believe it is.
And that's anticipating all council members?
And that is, we're not looking back historically. It doesn't appear that all council members attend those conferences. However, if the council collectively feels that they're likely to go, we can increase that number. That wouldn't be a problem at all.
Okay, just trying to get an idea of
Okay.
how many members you're anticipating. Okay.
But the other, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, but
Go right ahead.
if, assuming that no members go, then all that is returned back to the general fund, correct?
Budget savings, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. And in the future, if for any reason we anticipate that a greater number of council members may attend, what we would do at that time is we would come back to the city council and we would just appropriate the funds accordingly from an account, more than likely from the city manager's account.
Okay, any further questions? If not, we'll move on to the city manager's budget, which remains relatively the same. Looks like very close to the same for compared to the revised budget, with some increases to the operating transfers out. And that would be mostly transfers to outside agencies for promotional purposes and whatnot. Then we have the city manager bullet points, a new position, the administrative analyst, community promotional activities via communications specialist, and includes funding for outside agencies such as LAFCO, EDC, and et cetera. And we have the city attorney budget. We were looking at this today and wondering why the costs are going down so much, but these are the numbers that are in the city attorney's budget at this point, and we'll look a little bit closer at that before the final budget or before even the next budget workshop presentation. Again, there's some uncertainties there with how that's going to end up, whether it's going to be contracted services, which would be orange, or whether it be salaries and benefits, which is represented in blue here.
Sorry, Tim, can you go back there? So we're proposing that for the 1920, that would have a slight increase? I mean, it looks like on the salaries and benefits?
So one of the things that we attempted to do here is project if the city council were to like to hire an outside consulting firm versus an in-house, we were simply trying to capture the dollars. At the time, we weren't necessarily looking at it blue versus orange versus gray. We simply said, hey, we think it's going to be roughly X amount. Let's capture the dollars. Staff is going to have a much better idea probably as the council really moves forward through the process. But again, it was our goal to simply capture a dollar amount, not necessarily focus so much if it was going to be salaries, because at this point, until the council informs staff which approach you would like to take, and we'll come back and modify this one to reflect exactly what's going to happen based on council's decision.
So the color would be insignificant. It's more of a dollar amount that we're looking at.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So we just try to capture a dollar amount.
And so in the discussions of today, one of the thoughts that came up between discussions with staff is that we may have overlooked some of the M&O costs in there which could also add to this. But again, we'll look at it in more detail, maybe some slight revisions for the final budget or even the next budget workshop. One thing that's important to include, to point out in these discussions, is that we are only looking at the operational portion of the budget here. So that's the ongoing expenses that are covered by ongoing revenues, not the capital outlay, which we've completely separated out and we're not covering in this budget presentation. So this is what you're looking at when you decide if you have a balanced operating budget or not. And as city manager mentioned, we are proposing a balanced budget for the general fund operating budget this year, which is new and exciting for us. As mentioned, the budget can be used for hiring a new city attorney or a contract attorney, as the city manager mentioned. The dollars are put in there, but the color of those dollars may change. And this also includes a paralegal position. So finance. Finance looks like there's a considerable decrease in the current fiscal year, from the current fiscal year, I should say. We're reducing contracted services by $36,000 because software maintenance contracts have been moved over to the IT department, and we'll be leaving a position vacant. And as far as the non-operating budget, which we're not really covering here, there will also be a decrease from $160,000 to $115,000 to complete the Tyler Munis implementation. That'll be covered actually in the capital outlay budget, but just thought I'd mention that here today. Human resources. There's quite a considerable drop in the M&O costs here, and the main reason for that, I believe, would be the retrospective adjustment, which we're not paying a large retrospective adjustment in 1920. That would be human resources, which covers the two budgets that you have. Yes. What's that? Okay. So under human resources, some new changes. They'll have a new employee onboarding program, which will include a welcome packet for new employees, a full-day tour to give new employees a basic understanding of all city operations, 2 new employees to handle risk management functions, including funding for relevant training to help them transition into their new duties, and they'll complete the buildup of the Munis recruitment functions, including online employment applications. There's the police general fund, which you can see is a slight increase from the current fiscal year. It looks like the increase is primarily in the salaries and benefits, and there's their Measure K budget as well. So you're seeing increases in police both in the general fund and the Measure K portion. And their bullet points are that they anticipate being fully staffed for the first time in many years. They anticipate a 17% increase in the PD admin revenue budget from the 18-19 projection. And the past 3 budget years, Measure K finished each year with a surplus. And surplus Measure K funds will pay for the roughly $600,000 radio infrastructure upgrade, another exciting item for the city of Madera's budget in 1920. So code enforcement, it's a slight decrease in their overall budget, as you can see. Some of that's coming from salary, and looks like the M&O costs are staying roughly the same, and up slightly from the projected current year budget. So their bullet points are, in the past, have missed revenue projections by 40% due to estimates from the rental housing program, reliance on past large foreclosure fines, and few liens remain on properties that were abandoned during the real estate crash. Operating costs have decreased by 10% due to the cost savings associated with the realignment under the police department as well. Then there's the fire budget. You'll see some increase. This is the non-Measure K, so there's been some slight increases in their operating costs, their contract, and other operating costs. And remember, this does not include capital outlay. And then there's the Measure K. So in Measure K, basically the funds for the fire department have been building up over the last couple years, and it's all under maintenance and operations because, as I mentioned before, it's all contracted services, and we don't pay for employees to work there. They're not employed by the city. They're employed by the state of California through the CAL FIRE program. And again, this is for the staffing for the new fire station and necessary equipment and whatnot that'll need to they'll be provided. I shouldn't say equipment, but the operational supplies and whatnot that will be added. And again, this does not include the capital outlay, which there's considerable capital outlay for the fire station in the fiscal year, well, both 1819 and 1920. So their bullet points for fire is that includes Measure K funds for construction of the new fire station, up to 7 new firefighters, safety equipment and supplies for 6 months, and parking lot repaving at Station 57. They began funding for apparatus replacement and began contribution to reserve for Measure K fire, and the fire inspections, potential need for a new battalion chief position, which all of that's been covered by the city manager in his discussions. City planning, you can see that there's a reduction in their overall cost from the 1819 revised budget, and they're projecting a slight increase from the 1819 projected. And the projected is where they estimate that we'll be finishing out the current fiscal year. For their bullet points, revenues are expected to remain stable. Maintenance and operations are essentially unchanged from the prior year, and salaries are expected to approach what was budgeted in fiscal year 1819. The building department, you can see by these bar charts that they're also coming down from the revised budget, but up slightly from the projected ending 1819. And their bullet points are: construction activity remains strong. If the economy remains strong, it's anticipated that it will increase. And there is a vacant building inspector position, and staff may recruit a part-time inspector to assist. We'll continue to rely on plan check consultant to keep costs down. Engineering department, you can see that they're also reducing costs from the current year revised budget, but up slightly from their projected current year budget. Their bullet points: there's an emphasis on delivering projects and reducing private development plan checks costs through maintaining and expanding staffing. They're going to maintain part-time project manager, excuse me, originally hired for construction management of the fire station and transit facility, and maintain in-house drafting capability through the use of a part-time drafter. And
Councilman Hawley, I'm sorry, Tim, Councilman Hawley has a question.
Yes, I keep looking at these slides, and I don't think it's my eyes, but I noticed from the projected budget and the proposed budget are slightly different. If we're projecting and ending, that means our proposed budget is going to be higher than,
current year anticipated expenditures.
so it's going up instead of going down.
It is going up from the projected current year, but it's going down from last year's revised budget.
So I'm going to attempt to answer that, so one of the challenges that we have, Councilmember Hawley, is we do have a good number of vacant positions right now. And during the next fiscal year, our goal is to start filling some of those positions. Whereas some of those positions, again, we attempted to capture some of the salary savings, and we've allocated salaries and benefits for certain portions of the year. However, because we've had those vacant for a pretty good portion of this year, the number is projected to go up, simply because we're anticipating on filling some of those positions.
So really, what I'm looking at is what we have from the revised budget is mostly gonna be done in our proposed budget.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, continue with an engineering department's bullets. They're going to hire a second deputy city engineer and eliminate the part-time project development coordinator, and also hire an additional engineer intern for a total of 2, which are the first one starts in June. And they also are looking to reduce contracted services budget by $79,000 to $100,000 to account for temporary drafter becoming part-time employee. So here's the Public Works General Fund's budgets, which includes graffiti and streets. They are pretty close to their current year revised budgets, slight reduction, and there's some salary savings there, and just slightly higher than projected for the current fiscal year. They're in their budgets. Again, this 120,000 would not be included in their operational budgets, but in their capital outlay, there's 120,000 in street maintenance to fund a crack sealing project, which is funded by gas tax and Measure T. So really, all of the street general fund budgets, it's all pass-through money. It does get covered. All the expenditures get covered by gas tax, so it's typically no expense to the general fund. It's kind of a pass-through. Here are the Parks and Community Services budget. You know, they have several budgets. We've combined them for simplicity of presentation, and you'll see that there's a decrease in their budget from the revised 18-19 budget, and slight increase from the projected ending budget. So their bullet points, there's $20,000 in park administration to fund a consultant for parks capital projects, $20,000 in park maintenance to fund needed swimming pool repairs, and $70,000 in parks senior services as a result of reduction of CDBG funding. So in the grants department, you'll see that there's an increase in the grants budgets, their operational budgets, and with a decrease in total operating and transfer outs, so that a substantial increase in maintenance and operations. Their bullet points are that there's increase in transit personnel costs by an estimated 22%. It places demand on transit grant funds to cover a larger share of admin costs. And CDBG oversight to use $60,000 for a consultant to develop a new 5-year consolidated plan. That would be reflected in the substantial increase in M&O. So in the utility funds are the enterprise funds, water, sewer, garbage, solid waste, and so forth, and we'll cover those next. But these comments, some of these comments pertain primarily to the water fund, but we've followed the advice of the rate consultant, Raftelis, and we've recently lowered the water conservation rates by 50%. We delayed and reduced the scheduled 10% increase to 6%. We included final increases to take place in January of 2020, final rate increases to take place in January of 2020. And we're looking to issue debt to finance water infrastructure in 2020. And we're now meeting our debt service coverage requirements, and we're better positioned to complete deferred maintenance and expand infrastructure. The Public Works Department, their bullet points, additional bullet points, is $75,000 in the water fund and $37.50 in both the sewer and solid waste funds are respectively allocated to provide funds for rate studies. $25,000 is in the wastewater treatment plant to replace SCADA computers, $35,000 for a security camera system at the airport, and $40,000 to drill a new monitoring well at the airport. most of these are related to the capital projects budgets, the capital outlay, but we're just hitting the highlights for those at this time. Here are some slides. You'll see the bar, the blue bar across the top there, that's the revenues. Again, the salaries and benefits here are orange, and maintenance and operations are gray, and capital outlay is orange. So in the enterprise funds, we are covering and including the capital outlay budgets. So you'll see that in the current fiscal year revised budget, we're having much less capital outlay projected by the end of the fiscal year than was originally budgeted. And then next year, in the current projected year, we have more revenues than expenditures. And then again, in the 1920 proposed budget, there's more total expenditures than budget. Than revenues. And again, capital outlay, when you have large capital outlay expenditures, those come from fund balance. And you would expect in such years to have more total expenditures than revenues.
Are we talking about water usage?
We're talking about the water fund budget. So all of their expenses are in the bar charts. The line across the top is the revenues. So roughly for the current fiscal year, they have the revised budget called for a little over $19 million of expenditures, total expenditures, with the lion's share of that being capital outlay, whereas the total revenues in the revised budget were about $12 million. And again, the capital outlay typically comes from money that has been saved up over the years so that you can provide the infrastructure and capital outlay that's necessary. Sewer is a little bit different story. That they're having less expenditures in the current year than anticipated, including apparently less capital outlay than anticipated, and less capital outlay is budgeted in the next fiscal year. But it appears that their operational costs, which are the salaries and benefits and maintenance and operations, have remained fairly stable or consistent with the 18-19 revised budget and with the projected budget even in the sewer funds case. As far as refuse disposal, you'll see that we have more expenditures. There's very little, if any, capital outlay in this budget. There's nominal capital outlay in this budget, but the expenditures are exceeding revenues, and that's kind of been an ongoing situation with the solid waste fund, because at one point there were large reserves in that fund, and the city council said we're going to use down those reserves, leave the rates the same to the payers, and that's been the case so far. But it's getting to the point where we need to either reduce expenditures or increase revenues because the fund balance is being depleted.
So I have a question. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor. So in this proposed budget, does that include a rate increase or a?
No. Well, you see, again, in refuse disposal, you'll see that the blue line does not reflect an increase.
So we're still proposing a deficit to get to that 600,000 number. Okay. So
Yes, correct. So
everything is the same.
Yes, correct. So we are proposing a deficit in next fiscal year, but the one item that staff is recommending for council consideration is to appropriate funds to do a solid waste study to see exactly what that dollar amount should be. So we're still proposing to reduce the fund amount that's in there, but at some point we just have to right size it. So really, it's really about calibrating exactly what the ratepayer is paying, and that would be one of our asks. If it would be appropriate for staff to retain an industry expert to say this is exactly how much you should be charging. And so I'm not too sure what that dollar amount is, but we would be relying on a consultant. But it's still going down. So the fund account's being depleted right now.
Right.
Correct.
Councilman Rodriguez.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Medellin. So, City Manager Arnoldo, you mentioned possibly a study for the solid waste. With that,
Correct.
would that also include possible bids for the solid waste at all, or
Increase our expense.
Oh.
increase our expenses
So if memory serves me, I believe the existing contract that we have with Mid Valley, I believe is it a 2022? That's the number that comes to my mind. And at some point, when we talk to our consultant, in terms of the rates, at some point we would have to go to the table with Mid Valley and council to determine if we continue that relationship or if there is an RFP out, and to see if the council wants to get proposers for potential either operators for solid waste, or if you split it, that's something that we'll have to talk to the council about. This, in terms of the rate study, that doesn't take into account the contract that we currently have with Mid Valley, to my knowledge.
Yeah, and now, Tim, you mentioned something about, past practice. I think the city had a reserve balance for this account, for this fund. What was the reserve balance, or percentage-wise, that you guys would keep?
I'd have to, unless Public Works knows that number off the top of their head, I'd have to go back
I don't
and.
want to throw you off there,
find-
just kind of general idea.
I'll take a note and get back to you on that.
This was something that was, city council had also decided because they wanted to make sure that the ratepayers didn't increase their rates, correct?
That's what I've been told. It was before I got here, but that's
Yeah,
the
I'd be
story that I've
curious
also
to
heard.
know what that's been and the last rate increase that took place. Is it overdue, or have we not had a rate study that shows where
If
we're
I
at
remember
as far as-
correctly, it was a 5-year plan, and I think we're getting close to the end of that 5 years. Does that sound right to you, John and Mary? Okay. Okay, so the customers have enjoyed savings beyond the 5-year period then, apparently. We'll take that into consideration for
Thank you,
further
Tim.
budget preparations. Any other questions on the refuse disposal fund? Okay, again, drainage fund is coming down slightly. It looks like their revenues are staying consistent, but it appears that Public Works is budgeting to keep their costs within the revenues. So they're balancing their budget as well.
What's drainage fund?
So for the storm drainage, we need to maintain the storm drains and have ponding basins and whatnot to be able to treat the rain when it impacts us like it has recently.
So that's the water that builds up in these ponds.
And in the streets, so we need to keep the drains clean so that the water can drain out to the ponding basins and so on and so forth, so we don't have the streets flooding. Then there's the airport fund budget. You'll see that the big change is the capital outlay, which was in the revised budget. It appears that it's not going to happen in the current fiscal year as budgeted for, but there is some capital increase included in the 1920 proposed budget. And with, looks like a fairly substantial, well, based on the size of this budget, but increase in maintenance and operation costs. Then we have the golf course fund. We are proposing to balance the budget there, but there is a transfer in from the general fund to balance that budget. And capital outlay that was proposed in the 18-19 revised budget is apparently not going to take place in the current fiscal year nor the next fiscal year. Any questions?
Tim, can just let me highlight one item. So when Tim said that there's a transfer in, kind of what that means is that the general fund is currently paying roughly $392,000 to maintain the golf course. So a transfer in just means that we're taking money from the general fund and we're helping pay the debt on the golf course. The debt on the golf course, memory serves me, I think it runs through the year 2023, and after that the city will own the golf course outright. So right now we have a couple of years to go to pay for the golf course. The golf course was initially purchased in 1989, or actually there was debt back in 1989 to improve the golf course. The property, to my knowledge, was purchased prior to that. However, in a couple of years here, we'll have paid the golf course off.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, you know, just on that, I wanted to touch on that there. On the staff report here, it shows that the current balance that we have there is 539,000 minus.
That is correct.
So we're applying a transfer in of 392 annually?
For the current fiscal year, that's the amount. And it's varied close to that number over the past few years.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on is transit. There's the fixed route budget. They have some rather substantial capital projects for the new transit facility in the current fiscal year, which will be reduced in the next fiscal year. And they're also anticipating reduction in the fixed route rates, revenues, as you'll denote in the revenue line, whereas they're projecting an increase in revenues for the dial-a-ride program. And it looks like the capital outlay projects that they have proposed in the revised budget will be carried forward to the next fiscal year, as very little capital outlay appears to be projected to take place in the current projected 18-19 fiscal year. Their bullet points are that the contracted services forecast is an increase of 26% due to new operations contract. City does not anticipate receiving revenue from the county dial-a-ride of approximately $250,000. There's increased in fixed route ticket sales by 10% or $10,000, but will be offset by an anticipated decline in dial-a-ride ticket sales of 33% or same $10,000. As far as capital outlay, they plan on purchasing 11 buses and complete construction of the new transit center. And they're looking at a new grant of $177,000 for fare box modernization and transit stop signage.
Councilman Garcia has a question, Tim.
Could you go back to that slide about the 26%? Forecast an increase of 26% due to new operations contract?
Yes, so that contracted services, or they're paying for outside services, and that would be related to the new contract which they have with MV. Was it First Transit that you had before? First Transit that they had before. So they've signed a new contract with MV, and the rates compared to the previous service provider have gone up by 20%. Is that correct, Yvette?
20 or 26?
26. Did I say 20?
Can I hear you?
Do you know how to turn that on? Don't think so. Come on up.
So it is an increase in the operations cost, the contracted services, which is NV. And I just wanted to remind council that we are running a third line. That's the route to the college. So that continues to demonstrate an increase in cost to operate our system.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette.
Take
Okay.
my mic.
Okay, so we have covered transit. Now we can talk about unassigned fund balance. Unless there's any questions on any of the enterprise funds that we've covered, their operational or capital outlay expenses. Okay, so in unassigned fund balance, staff anticipates completing the current fiscal year with a surplus. In an attempt to allocate staff resources, direction is being requested. Some potential projects may include sidewalk repairs, per the council direction at the CIP workshop, the Rotary Park curb replacement along North Gateway Drive per council direction at the CIP workshop, and the City Hall Annex improvements to relocate engineering, planning, and building departments to the previously referred to, maybe currently referred to as the redevelopment agency building over on Yosemite. And some other projects to consider are the Town and Country Park trail repair or replacement, and the general fund update, and the city facility investment fund. So these are the types of things that we could consider utilizing any reserves that are unassigned for per the city's policies. Any questions, comments, or directions on these items or additional items from the city council?
Tim, if I may just add a couple of things here. It may appear as though staff is putting the cart before the horse here when it comes discussing unassigned fund balances, because quite frankly, we don't know what that dollar amount is. At the CIP discussion, staff clearly heard that council has two focus areas. That's a sidewalk replacement program or repair program, and then also the curb and gutter along Rotary Park. We are going to continue to work towards making that happen during this fiscal process or during this budget process that we're in right now. Moving forward, staff does want to plant a couple of seeds here, obviously. So some of these items are a little self-serving. So, for example, the relocation of staff from City Hall to the former redevelopment agency office, that office can almost in its current condition, I would say can accommodate the vast majority of the employees there. However, we wouldn't have enough workstations for our existing employees. And I don't believe that the front counter is conducive to the customers that it's expected to serve. The front counter is absolutely beautiful, I may add. However, the front counter is probably more reflective of a city hall office or a medical office or an establishment where customers are not being served at the front counter. As we collectively know, when architects and engineers come into the front counter or contractors, they have the larger plans and the front counter is not deep enough. So we do have to make some minor adjustments to the front counter. Are they enormous? No. However, our line of thinking was let's try to make those improvements before we get staff there so we're not disrupting the employees and really at the end of the day, so we're better serving the customer, which is the goal of staff. And we're simply trying to take that into account, especially when contractors come in. They're in a hurry. They want to get their building permit. They want to go in, and now they don't want to, really hang out at City Hall for very long periods of time. So we have 3 items there. The County Country Park Trail repair, this is one of the items that I know I've heard since coming back to the city of Madera. One of the challenges with County Country Park is I don't think that the city has historically allocated general fund dollars for park repair. Quite frankly, I think the city's done fairly well in getting grants for certain parks, but then simply because of its location, it's a little more challenging to get grant dollars for County Country. It comes down to demographics. And so with that being said, it's an enormous park. It has a lot of visitors, just like some of the other parks. And because we've had the opportunity to invest in some of our other parks, hopefully we can invest some money into Rotary here during this process so we can make some of the truly necessary repairs there. We're in the process of replacing the play structure at Pan Am. We anticipate that actually, I think it broke ground yesterday, if memory serves me. I'm looking at John. Yeah, it started yesterday. And then we've also made some significant improvements to the well center. Those are all much needed repairs. With that being said, the trail at County Country Park, in my opinion, is in disrepair. There's a lot of people that like to walk with people of all ages. It truly serves an entire community, and that's why that item's on there. The general plan update, general plans, that's the long-term vision for the city. It was last updated in the city in 2006. As a general rule of thumb, there's a state guideline per the Office of Planning and Research from the state of California that states that you should look at it every 10 or so years. There's no law. It's simply a guideline. However, to go through this process to really set out a new vision for the city or to recalibrate the vision that we have, because the vision may be a very good vision, but at some point it should be updated. Those plans cannot stay static and they can't really sit truly on a bookshelf. They're fluid and they should be living documents. To update the plan, I would anticipate anywhere between $1 and $1.2 million to update that plan. And right now, we have not begun to set funds aside. And so my thinking is maybe there's an opportunity here if we do have a couple of extra dollars. And I don't know what that dollar amount is. It can be as little as $5,000. It could be as much as a couple $100,000. I really doubt it's going to be the latter. It's probably going to be the former. It's probably going to be a very small dollar amount. But my thinking is we would put it in a capital improvement account. We would leave it there and we would build it up over a number of years. So when we do have to do it, there's not an enormous hit on the general fund or any other funds. City Facility Investment Fund, and this one comes directly from me as well. And this would be to potentially start to reinvest into some of our key buildings here at the city. The city's done a very good job in maintaining some of its buildings. I'm not too sure how much money we've actually put into some of them. For example, the Parks Department, I'm going to say the Parks Department maintenance crew is currently operating out of a very small house out of the Public Works yard. And when I say very small, it's in extremely rough condition. At some point, we're going to have to address that. I'm not too sure exactly how to address that right now. However, I can tell you with absolutely confidence it's going to take money. And so my goal is to start setting up an account so we can start addressing some of the shortcomings we have as a city to say, you know, if we have some deferred maintenance for our employees, let's start putting some dollars in an account where we make sure that they're in solid buildings, that we're recruiting the employees we want and we're keeping them, or they're not running away because they say, hey, you know what, the city doesn't care about us. Look at our building. And quite frankly, the building's in very, very poor condition, and I think I'm putting it lightly. The other thing, too, is the city has acquired the property at Freedom Industrial Park for a future corporation yard. We own the land. The transit facility is being built right now. We have the infrastructure to it, which is great. However, at some point, if the city is going to be serious about truly investing in its city facilities, at some point we have to start allocating some funds to that. I can tell you with a straight face, besides the Parks Department staff, I know that the wastewater treatment plant, in terms of their offices, also need some work. Their bathrooms, their shower facilities, their offices need some improvements. There are probably a couple of other that I'm missing here. However, those are the two that come to my mind. At some point, my recommendation would be, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but at some point, I think that it would be prudent for us as an organization to start to talk about some of our future needs and start allocating some funds to those needs. So with that, that's how the list was drafted. It's some of it's going to be long-term out. However, the journey of 1,000 miles, it truly begins with the first step, and this from my perspective, is the first step. So with that, I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Thank you for that input.
Yes, thank you. So the recommendation is for the City Council to approve direction for any changes that you'd like to see in the budget that's been presented so far. There will be undoubtedly some minor changes to the numbers that have been presented this evening, but we're going to try to keep it as close to this as possible, and we will provide more detail. We kind of got a really late start on this budget, but we're confident we can pull it all together in time for the final budget presentation at the meeting in late June. With that, I'd like to hear any recommendations, requests, questions that council might have for staff.
Councilman Rodriguez.
Thank you, everyone. So, Tim, we heard earlier that we don't have certainty on those unassigned funds yet. So obviously there was a list on the staff report of some of the items, and I think you presented some of those as well. You know, when can we anticipate to have more accurate numbers? By what time, so that maybe this list can come back and circulate once more and see what the important. I missed the capital outlay workshop, and I know that my fellow council members, you know, obviously had some good recommendations as to where those money should be allocated to. But you know, obviously the city always needs. It's always in need of you know, other projects. We talked about parks, Rotary being one of them, Town and Country, Lions Park. I'm sorry, and you know, we just passed an ordinance here that's tobacco free. So I think we should follow up on that and actually provide better amenities for our community. One being, you know, health and fitness. You know, we've already moved forward on this tobacco free zone, And I just think it'd be a disservice not to follow that up with something better for our community, strive to become a better health and fitness community. Madera in itself, suffers from obesity and diabetes. And I know that's a certain sector of Madera, but we should really focus on having more of a, healthy environment. Healthy communities is what I wanted to say. And, anything that we can do out there, whether it be grants or capital outlay funds that can be utilized for maybe amenities that can be allocated strictly for parks that promote health and fitness. Outdoor gym, for example. I mean, I know I wasn't here that day to promote that, but that's something that I'll continue to go and advocate for, because I think it's important, especially now that we're pushing this ordinance with tobacco free. Let's go ahead and push it a step further and maybe start looking into these healthy communities.
Okay, that sounds like an endorsement for the proposal for the Town and Country track repair replacement, which would be a great step in toward the direction you're talking about.
Not necessarily just on this side of town, but even take it a step further and maybe look out for Rotary Park, McNally, or whatever. Let's start looking at those areas, because I think Councilman Hawley really brought up a good point with the smoke, the smoking environments and how that really has a negative impact for our kids. But it's certain areas in that section of town that really need us to promote more healthy communities.
And I would be hesitant to lock in a date before getting approval from the city manager, but perhaps by the next budget workshop, we could have that to go along with the capital outlay portion of the general fund, where we would talk about.
I think that that would be very aggressive, and
Okay.
I'm not too sure if we can actually get that, because again, we would be basing on a lot of assumptions. But I can assure you, as soon as we can possibly have it, the sooner the better. I think for the council, for the community, and quite frankly for staff. But as soon as we have a more refined number, we're going to race back to city council to say, council, here's our number. We're confident that this is the number. It's not a moving target. Again, I simply think that it would be truly unfair to the council, and I don't think that I would be meeting your expectations if I gave you a number and I would have to eat crow and come back and say, oh, you know what, I was wrong. I'm not just sure that I would want to put the council in that position.
So no outdoor gym is what you're saying.
No, I heard you loud and clear that really it's an outdoor gym, healthy living, and that's what you're going to advocate for. The exact location is secondary. Just making sure that we're promoting healthy living. I completely agree with you, council member.
Don't want to, speak in behalf of anybody, but I know that when I say outdoor gym, it promotes very healthy communities, but at the same time, it channels a lot of the youth's activities to do something even more positive outlook. And I hate to throw this back out at Chief, but maybe Measure K, maybe some type of coordination between these, I'm not sure, funds or what have you, but put something together, it would really help out our community quite a bit.
Mayor Pro Tem Montes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And did we have any, at least rough estimates on what these projects were going to cost? Because that might factor into, what are we going to be reasonably able to do? Because the unassigned number went from, what was it? I've heard of a bunch of different, 4 million to nothing to a couple bucks, so I want to make sure that, we have some realistic expectations on some of these projects as well. I know the money that comes in is going to affect it a lot, but we could maybe do a couple of these if some of them aren't going to be very expensive, or they're not going to be $4 million. But I was going to advocate for, and I think this is probably, I don't know if it would be the most expensive one, but facility investment fund, because of what you said, where we want to make sure that the employees know that we're looking out for them, we're taking care of them, they know that we care about where they go to work, because if they're working out of a shack, sometimes it's kind of hard to say that well, city really doesn't care, they're hiding me away back here, but they're also going to provide a better service to the community, and I think that at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do as well. I'm not to say that any of these are bad ideas or anything. I think that I would advocate for that, the city facility investment fund. But again, knowing what you have in mind, kind of at least a rough estimate of what those would cost, I think that would make it a little bit easier to make that decision.
A couple of ballpark figures here. With the sidewalk repair program, that council had identified during the CIP workshop, we were, again, simply shooting from the hip as staff. We said, well, what if we put $100,000 for next fiscal year? Does that seem like a reasonable number? And then at that point, that's the number that we were going to pitch out to council to say if we had an extra $100,000 to say we sidewalk repair only for this, a couple of handful of blocks, and quite frankly, probably in the most needy part of our community, how far does that take us? So that's a number that we were going to pitch out to council. Again, kind of knowing that number at the end of the day, it's up to the council. If you say no, we want more, we want less, and we think we can, again, it's completely up to the council. The number on the curb replacement at Lines at Rotary, at Lines Rotary, I'm going to look over to Keith. The number 150,000 comes to my mind, but I shouldn't give you a number. I'm going to defer to him.
We'll come up here, Keith.
It's not working. We need new microphones in the budget.
Mark? That's the city facility.
Yeah, it does show it's on.
It's those little.
I was trying to go ahead and remember. I may need to go ahead and look at my text for the number that I gave you, but I wanted to say it was like $250,000 or so, and that was a conservatively high number because we were looking at it as possibly being a separate project in itself. Separate projects run more if they're small. Now, if we also thought about trying to package it into something else. If we do that, we get better unit prices, and we might drop it significantly.
I happen to have my phone, and I found the text. So it's $140,000 and that would be for half of it. Only that would be for the western half.
That would be the west side on the parking lot side. For the east side or the road side, we're looking at putting that in as part of a road rehabilitation project. We can go ahead and use road funds for that. For the park side, we debated whether those would fly, and we don't feel real comfortable with it.
And so we had $100,000 for the sidewalk repair program. And again, that would be for 1 year for a designated area. If we have additional funds, we're going to race back to council and say, council, this is what we have a comfort level with. For a portion of the repair of Rotary Park, as Keith alluded to a short time ago, the east side near the travel lane, we think that we can use some other funding sources to make that repair. The parking lot side, we would have to use general fund dollars, unless, of course, we were very aggressive and we try to get a grant. Some of those grants sometimes are for new park space, not repairs, so it kind of throws a monkey wrench in the equation. However, we're going to continue to look for that. The Town & Country Park Trail, using a ballpark figure of about $50 per foot, and we know that a travel lane is about 10 feet in width, it would be roughly $250,000. And that would be for the trail at Town & Country Park. For general plan update, my guesstimate would be roughly between $1 and $1.2 million to update our general plan. That number's fluid, and a lot of it's going to depending on the economy. If the economy is doing not so well, that number probably comes down a little bit. If the economy is scorching hot like it is today, that number goes up. Primarily because planning consultants and environmental consultants are really busy and their price goes up. So I would not recommend, even if we had the money today, I would say, council, you know what? Let's wait a little bit just to see if we can get that price down, because when consultants are not very busy, the price comes down. However, that is a project that we would have to rely on consultants because there's a lot of specialists that have to come into play. And a lot of that's driven by the California Environmental Quality Act. Which is a state regulation, not a local regulation. In terms of City Hall Annex improvements, we were speculating just for the furniture, which we already have a quote on, that would be about $40,000. That's simply to get our staff over there. What that does not take into account are any improvements to the front counter. So again, just to simply move our staff, and that doesn't include any funding to scan some of the documents that we have. One of the challenges that the day we move over there, we have a lot of paperwork, and one of the things we don't want to do is take all of our paperwork from here to over there. What we'd like to do is scan some of that. So again, the $40,000 is furniture only, and that's reusing almost everything we have over there. There's very little new furniture, but cubicle walls are very expensive for some reason. And what that does not include is getting rid of the building that we have, the trailer and back, and making some improvements to the parking lot. So if I had to guess, the number that we pitched out the other day was probably closer to $250,000. Can we do it for a lot less? Absolutely. And then what we could try to do is sell off our asset in the trailer in the back, and then maybe use some of those proceeds to make some of the parking lot repairs. It can just make it look presentable. So there's a couple of numbers right there. So we would have probably $250,000 for the trail at County Country Park, roughly $100,000 for the sidewalk repair program, roughly $140,000 for Rotary Park parking lot improvements only. The street side would be different. And then City Hall Annex improvements. City Facility Investment Fund. And that one would be, I think long term, whenever we as an organization can allocate funds to that, I think that it's much needed. And quite frankly, I think it's long overdue. Just because some of our facilities, we do have to put some money back into them. And so whatever that dollar amount is, I can assure you any dollar we put is more than a dollar we're putting in today. And so at that point, any dollar amount I think would be tremendous, because at the end of the day, if we do elect, and at some point, certain facilities are going to have to be moved. For example, the corporation yard. For any dollar that we have to put out of our pocket, we're probably going to have, or it simply means one less dollar that we have to borrow. And that's always positive. Again, that's a long-term project. But at some point, we just have to start putting some money in the account to say, you know what, that's our goal. We see the vision. Let's start doing it. We're going to have a much better idea in terms of where we're at in terms of the surplus. So a couple of key takeaways from this evening. We're going to be presenting a balanced budget for next year. We haven't touched our general fund reserve. Our Measure K revenue projections are going up, which is positive. Now, our overall retail taxes are proposed to go 2% down. However, that's still an increase in terms of where we're at a year ago. And so with that being said, we are going to have some salary savings, and I apologize for not having a more concrete number this evening for council, but I simply thought it'd be premature just because we're still kind of in the middle of the entire thing. But again, any dollar amount would be greatly appreciated, and obviously the council can't give me a dollar amount because I'm not telling you how much you have. And so I'm really putting you at a disadvantage, and I acknowledge that. But again, maybe it's just something for the council to chew on, to give it some thought, and at some point when we come back, those are some of the things we came up with. But again, council may come back and say, staff, we like your plan. This sounds good. However, we have an immediate need here. And that's perfectly okay as well. We're here at and we're going to take council's direction. So if you have a different school of thought, or if you want to put whatever funds we have into a separate project, we're perfectly okay with that. You just tell us really what you want to do, and we're willing to do it.
So some of these items that the city manager has mentioned are like $200,000, $250,000 to be set aside for certain projects that will take place in the future. He mentioned the general plan update of $1.2 million. So we might set aside $200,000 per year to be built up for that. Those things will not be budgeted. They would just be they would be included in assignments as far as designating those for future use. So funds that are available in the fund balance at the end of the year could be designated for that, but wouldn't necessarily be run through the budgets. And I like that approach. I think it's good to set aside dollars for future use. Again, that concludes our presentation. Be happy to take any direction from council at this time.
Councilman Garcia.
So for speaking firstly for myself, we've had this discussion about the funds that our city generates and what we have in our funds for quite a number of months now. I was initially frustrated by the conversation we had regarding a deficit of 1.3 million or something. And well, that isn't really true. We don't have that. But I mean, these things tend to confuse a layperson. So when I'm looking at this, and then we find that there are funds that are assigned to something, but we say they're unassigned, and then the numbers go away. That 4 million is not really something that we can use. And so do you anticipate either of yourselves an end to this so that we can have a true reflection? Is it going to be months? Is it going to be another year? Or are we going to be able to dive into the weeds deep enough to find out and give us an accurate number? Because if we don't have an accurate number, there's no way that we can get our wish list together and put it out there. This is what we want to do because we don't have the monies. And so it's frustrating to me to not have an accurate account and be able to look at these, because you've all heard our wish lists. We all have different ones, but I'm frustrated that we don't have an end in sight yet, and we still don't have that. So
I completely agree with you and empathize with your frustration, and I feel the same way. I can assure you, Ken, that we're going to have a number here sooner rather than later on the 4.67 million to find out exactly where we're at financially, making sure that we're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and we'll be coming back to the council. I don't want to say in 2 weeks because there's a couple of moving parts here that again, I have to be absolutely confident. Whatever number we provided the council, our employees, our community, we know that that's it. But we're going to be working diligently to make sure that we give you a concrete number.
thank you.
Councilman Robinson.
Yes, I have some proposal. I was wondering, what is the CalPERS effect on our 5-year budget outlook? Because it's a major crisis.
We have anticipated the impact of that in our prior budgets, and we will have those comparisons and that information available for you in our final budget for this year, if not sooner.
Because, in that case, we need to increase our rainy day fund to like 35% up, or, a little larger,
Is that a rainy day fund, is that what you said?
Yeah, like a rainy day fund, in anticipation to, rising costs, if the market fall, so we can provide services to our, our city services and also personnel. Like for instance, the Great Recession, a lot of people lost their homes and jobs, and that could happen again. And number two, and what is the future plan for a large park on the north side of the city? Because right now we have kids playing in the streets, and it's becoming real dangerous. We have wall, communities over there on the east side, and near Pershing Elementary, they have a lot of vacant lands over there. And then number three, I was thinking that instead of the city paying for $2,200 a month for each city council member, you should eliminate that and just increase their pay to $2,200 a month to cover their own medical coverage. They can pay their own medical coverage and travel expenses. And be fair across the board for people who take medical insurance and those who don't. That's all.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Councilman Hawley.
Yes, I brought this up before. This is what irks me. When I hear about we need all these projects and we need all this stuff done. When I look at our general fund, that's money just sitting there. I mean, I know nobody like to talk about it. But if we don't ever use it, all it's going to do is sit. When people tell me that you guys are broke and somebody says, no, we got $11 million, and then we come into a budget meeting and we talk about projects that needs to be done, probably $100,000, or another project might cost another $70,000. Why do we have a general fund sitting with $11 million and don't use it? I mean, that irks me. That just bothers me to death. When we sit here and come to a budget meeting and we're talking about balance of budget and we got all these projects to get done, and each year we can't do something because the money's not there, we're going to die one day, y'all. And that money's still going to be sitting there growing eggs. If we got projects that needs to be done and they're prudent to our community, use the money. That's what it's there for. It's not there just to grow and wait. We don't know something going to happen overnight, but each year we accumulate a few extra dollars that goes back into the general fund, and it's just building and building. And then we come into a budget meeting and say we don't have no money. That hurts me. I mean, I've been doing this here for over 6 years now, and I hear the same thing every year. that we have that money sitting there and nobody talks about using it. And that bothers me. And we got a few projects like at Town and Country that needs to be done, and yet we want to set aside money to do this. And we talk about another project, and we want to set aside money to that. And these things are done, needed done immediately. And we setting there money in reserve. Come on, y'all. Let's either use it or throw it away or give it to the people across the county or use it for you. But we need to start using it. I mean, I'm watching it grow every year, and we still come back and say we have a deficit. Sure, we're going to always have a deficit if we don't start using what we got.
This year we have no deficit in the
Yeah.
1920 budget yet.
Yeah, I've heard that one before in 6 years. But I'm just saying, we need to start. I know it's a council decision, but council, we need to start looking at this. This money, we might be dead and gone off the council and somewhere else, and it's still growing, and we still got needs. Let's take care of the needs so people won't complain about what our problems are. When they hear that that money's sitting there, what are you doing with it? Well, only answer we can give them, I don't know. So this is why I keep bringing it up. We get to talking about we going for grants. Well, grants are going to come, and you still can put the money back in there once you get it. But we need to start taking care of home first and fixing what needs to be fixed. That reserve general fund, I don't know. Can anybody tell me what is it ever going to get used? Because I ain't never, in my 6 years, I ain't seen nobody pull a penny out of it. Not one penny. But we come up here and last year we had a 1.3 deficit of a budget. Okay, that alarmed everybody in the whole city. And then we found out later it's not a deficit. It's never a deficit to me as long as we got $11 million to look at. My next question is, we got this RDA fund that's sitting over there with $5 million in it. What are we going to do with that? RDA closes in what, another month or two? There's another $5 million and we don't know what we're going to do with it yet. Where does it go? Some more projects that can be done. We need to start using this instead of letting it grow hair. And so that's what frustrates me when I know there's that $5 million and the 11 we got, that's $16 million that we don't know what to do with yet. But yet we sit here and talk about the projects that needs to be done. And I think we need to start looking at that because as we get older, we're not going to be here to make decisions. So we need to start making them now to fix up our city. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Councilman. Anyone else have any input? Just to your point about the RDA, there was roughly short of $5 million, but it is spoken for. I think there might be a few dollars left over, and when we're talking about the same few dollars we may have in our budget. But what I wanted to say about the whole budget first is I like the key changes that we talked about in the very beginning. I think those are some very good changes as we separate the Measure K funding. I think it helps with transparency. I think it helps with all of us as we look at those funds separately. And I realize that it's hard to do a 30% set aside in the very beginning, but just the fact that we want to lead up to that, I think is very fiscally responsible, and I think it's a good projection to have. Pretty much the same policy that we have with our own budget. We just couldn't put 30% in immediately, but knowing that that's a goal to strive for, I really like that. And putting set aside money, again, I think that's absolutely fantastic, that we know that fire trucks do not last forever. And if we find out that we're having to patch something and then talk about a plan to save money, just does not make sense to me. So I think this is a very good plan, and I like those changes. And then separating the CIP from the general fund, again, it kind of seems like a no-brainer now, but I think it's an absolute fantastic idea. But I do want to say this. It is the cart before the horse, but our budget is continually moving. There will not be a time that we are set in stone solid. It is a moving document constantly, right? We started the whole workshop on assumptions and projections, and we're going to end on assumptions and projections. And that is year after year after year. That's just the way we have to do it. And that's why it's not easy to say we have money sitting there, let's just spend it, because we don't know what the horizon is. So this city lasted through the Great Recession, where a lot of cities did not, based on those principles of it's always good to know that it's there in case we need it. We are now in a better position that we're actually having a discussion saying there are needs, whereas years past, it didn't matter what our needs are, we just didn't have the money to do it. So those key changes now lead to what I have written down here as a plan, a budget, and priority. Let's make a plan. It may be a long list. It's probably going to be a list that we can afford, but we have to make a plan, whether it's parks or sidewalks or capital improvement. We are on the road to making that plan, and then this council this evening is saying, well, what's it going to cost? And that's a good question to ask. We probably won't have the money to do so, but that leads me to priority. If you get us a plan, and this council recognizes with staff the need, and we put a dollar amount to it, we will come to a point to where that number is a little more solid, and then we as a council collectively can decide if it's sidewalks, parks, none of the above, or all of the above. So the only change to your point, Tim, and I really don't have a dollar amount for you, Mr. Rodriguez, because I just cannot do that, but the only recommendation or change that I may have is moving forward, because this is such a live, living, moving document, that this council is updated more than mid-year. It could be something very simple, but I think because there's projections, we need to know what the next quarter projections are, but did we meet the previous quarter projections? And I think that's good information to have for council as we move forward. If we see that things are looking good, we will start to implement some of these plans. And if we see that the future may be a little bleak with a 2% reduction in proposed sales tax revenue, that we now know what kind of decisions need to be made. So that would be the only recommendation I would make. When we talk about spending money on different projects, I kind of want to allude to the workshops, the however many teen workshops we have over the next 4 or 5 months. When we have a workshop about our Parks Department, I think it's going to tell an even better story about the need in our entire Parks Department. And I'm going to tell you now, I'm an advocate about Town and Country Park. I think it's a great idea. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year, and nothing was really done, and I think it's been a very, very long time that we've made those improvements for a park that tens of thousands of people use, not only in our community, but throughout the state, really. But we're going to have workshops about capital improvement. We're going to have workshops about sidewalks. We're going to have workshops about parks and things. And so when we get a better understanding, it might help us to understand that $100,000 in sidewalk projects is a lot of money. It doesn't not get us a whole lot of sidewalk. And so before we start to put amounts or direction to those things, I think we should maybe go through that process. I want to take this opportunity as I close is to thank staff, because this is a lot of work. Besides the day-to-day operations and getting business done, doing budgets is a lengthy, lengthy process. And I especially want to thank Mr. Rodriguez, because I will say, in my opinion, in my estimation, that he's done 12 months of work in only the last 6 months. This is very, very difficult to step into as a new city manager and start to look at salaries and benefits, and in the same breath try to have a budget and have it set in stone and say, here's your number. It's almost impossible. It is impossible. And so, quite frankly, where we are today, I'm pleased. I'm pleased to know that we've done a lot of work in a short amount of time, and to know that we don't have a number, but more than likely that number's black. I'm okay with that. I really, really am. So again, I want to thank staff, all of you, for your time and energy into this budget, and working with our new city manager to getting us to where we are today. That's all I have.
Mayor, if I could, I want to give special thanks to Susan O'Hara and Eric Battles. As you know, I was out for 2 weeks after surgery, and they picked up the ball and ran with it. And all the departments have done a fantastic job of getting their numbers in this year. We have a lot of changes. We're presenting things differently, and I think we're doing our best. And thank you for those comments about staff.
You're welcome. I like it. You know, changing a budget is not easy. Changing the way we do things in the past is not easy. But there's obviously some changes that have been made already, and my assumption is there's going to be more changes in the future as we move forward. And that's a good thing. I think that's a great thing. So again, we understand that it takes time and we need to measure twice and cut once. But I think we're on the right path. I really do. Any other input from council? From staff? Anybody else? Is that all we had this evening? I can, under 2 hours? Well, we still have council reports, so. Yeah, that does deserve an applause. It certainly does. You know what? I don't have council reports on the agenda. That means I don't have to. That means I don't have to acknowledge, but I will anyway. I will just have to. There's a council member that wants to share anything.
Yes,
Councilman Robinson.
I attended the Procurement Seminar by the Housing Authority on contracts and bids. It was very informative. It's talking about the 3 bid offer, the dates that have to be on the contract, and clear detailed plans on what is to be done on the contract. It was very educational.
Good. Thank you for that, Councilwoman Gallegos.
Just something really quick. On Friday at midnight, one of my child restaurants will be closing after 55 years. Don Cederloff has owned Farnesi's. And so Joseph, thank you, Joseph, and City Manager Rodriguez drew up a certificate of appreciation from the City of Madera that have served our residents all these years. And so in the certificate, each council member will hopefully sign it, and I will present it when the doors close on Friday. All we know as city officials is that it will be leveled. We have no idea if something will be going there. It is the best kept secret in Madera right now. So it's sad to see Don Cederloff go, but he's put in his time and he needs to retire and enjoy life with his wife and grandchildren. So on behalf of the City of Madera, I'll be there when the doors close on Friday.
Are they going to close the one in Chowchilla?
It's totally differently owned.
Two brothers, aren't they?
No. Farnesi's originally owned it. When Don bought it, he had to keep the name because it was an agreement he made with Farnesi's at the time. It wasn't, the bank really didn't get involved. It was a personal thing, so he kept the name, but differently owned.
I think Channel 30 did a great job, too, in highlighting them. And just for the record, Don's daughters, Cece and I went to school with. And so, yeah, a lot of fun times at Farnesi's when we were younger and even to this day. So it is a sad day for Madera, but we wish the Cederloff family all the best in their retirement. So thank you, Councilwoman, for doing that. Councilman Garcia.
I have no report. Thank you.
Councilman Hawley.
Yes. So all of you know, I went to Virginia, had a great time. I had a great time. I didn't like the airline time, but I had a great time. My son was able to graduate from the Army. He's a supply specialist, and he will be stationed in Fort Hood, Texas, which is in Killeen. So I brought him back home with me. So he's only here for a couple of weeks and get to take off. But it was nice to see. First time I ever, even when I was in the military, I didn't get the excitement that he's got. To watch a military graduation is something special. It's a lot different than going to a high school or junior high school, because you see what you call mannerism, how folks really pay attention. You ain't got all that smiling and giggling and laughing. They are at attention even in their seats. So just to see that, and they don't even get to look at you. It's just amazing how mannerable they are and how disciplined they all are. So it was something really good to see. But other than that, I had a great time.
Good.
I brought a few momentums back.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. And congratulations once again. Something to be very proud of.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing.
Texas is a little closer. Thank
Councilman Rodriguez.
Nothing to report, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Montes.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just have the Centro Binacional, let me see, invited me and wanted to get this information out to the community that they're going to have an event providing services, promoting services that they provide to the community. And they're going to be at Virginia Lee Rose, June 1st, 2009. So this Saturday, and I believe, I'm trying to pull it up, the time. bear with me, I apologize. I should have had this ready. I didn't think we were gonna do,
I think it's 10.
10, 10:30
council,
till
they
2.
like council.
So it's just an event to highlight the services that they provide to the community residents. I'm trying to get the city out there to highlight some of the services that we provide to the community as well. So, if, the community wants to go out there, we'll be out there from 10:30 to 2, I believe. And, that's just a good community event. Make sure that we get the word out there.
Thank you very much. And I'm not sure if any of you saw on KMPH this morning, the City of Madera was highlighted on Great Day. We want to thank them and thank Hopi. And I want to thank my colleagues, Mayor Pro Tem Montes and Councilwoman Gallegos, for getting up extra early this morning and being on camera at 6:10 in the morning to say some wonderful, great things about the City of Madera. Supervisor Poitras, as well as our Chief of Police, and Superintendent Todd Lyle and a few others got a chance to also highlight, and finished up with myself and our City Manager, Arnoldo Rodriguez, to thank Hopi and thank KMPH for highlighting the City of Madera. And I watched just about all of it this morning, and it gave me chills, because there are a lot of great things happening in the City of Madera, lots to talk about. And I appreciate KMPH coming out and saying, you guys should be highlighting quite a bit. So that was very nice of them. And again, thanks my colleagues. And a huge shout out to Joseph, who really put the whole thing together from beginning to end. So we really, really appreciate all his efforts in working side by side with KMPH. Again, thank you to staff. Everybody, really appreciate your efforts in getting us to where we need to be, and that's moving forward. So thank you all very, very much. With that, meeting adjourned.